Ever heard of a marriage ending, not because of, the typical reasons like abuse or infidelity,
Mm.
but because one person was just, like, deemed fundamentally incapable of being married?
Yeah. Interesting.
It sounds kind of crazy, right? Like something out of a movie almost.
Yeah, it does a little bit.
But get this, it happened right here in the
Right
Philippines.
here.
And it ended up as this huge landmark case in the Supreme Court.
Huge.
It, like, changed how we think about
Mhm.
marriage and responsibility and all that.
I see.
So we are diving deep today into this crazy case, Zeth versus Neil Fopalan.
Okay.
I think you guys are really going to want to hear this one.
I'm ready.
Okay, so to, like, set the scene a little bit,
Okay.
Zeth and Neil's story, it started out like a lot of couples, they met in college.
Right.
But, looking back, there were some serious red flags right from the get-go.
Yeah, right from the beginning.
And I mean, like, really big red flags.
Okay.
Like, Neil, right from the start.
Okay.
He was doing things that, I mean, they weren't illegal or anything,
Yeah,
but they
yeah.
definitely, like, made you question whether he was really cut out for, like, commitment and responsibility,
Yeah, I hear you.
Like, for example, and this is kind of wild,
Okay.
he straight up admitted to Zeth
Right?
that he was dating 5 women.
5.
5 at the same time when they first met.
Wow.
Like, can you imagine?
That's a lot.
So that right there, I mean, that's a pretty clear sign, right? That he wasn't exactly a one-woman kind of guy.
I could say that.
Right.
It's like
Inability to prioritize,
Sure.
commit to one person.
You got it.
And then there's the whole situation with Shirley.
Oh, Shirley, right?
Now, Shirley, she was Neil's long-term girlfriend, like, before Zeth.
I see.
And his mother, she really did not like Shirley. Hated her. Absolutely hated her.
Wow.
And so to kind of get around his mom's disapproval, they ended up doing a shotgun wedding with Zeth.
Shotgun wedding. Wow.
It's almost like, and this is what's so interesting about this case, it's almost like he wasn't even capable of making his own decisions. Like he was just like constantly being swayed by, whoever was around him at the time.
I see.
Which, I mean, that's not exactly a great foundation for a strong marriage, right?
Not really.
Where you're like independent and can, stand on your own 2 feet.
Not at all.
And that kind of lack of independence, that extended to his finances too.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Zeth ended up supporting him
Supporting him.
financially for their entire marriage.
The whole time.
The whole time, he contributed absolutely nothing.
Wow.
I mean, I get it. People go through rough patches,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Job loss, whatever.
Happens.
But to, like, contribute nothing for the entire marriage, that, to me, that suggests a deeper issue.
I agree. It does seem like a pattern.
It's a pattern of behavior.
Right.
And the court, they looked at all of this. When they were evaluating Neil's behavior, the whole picture.
Yeah, it's all part of the story.
They weren't just looking at, like, isolated incidents. They were looking for these patterns. And it was all, like, contributing to this idea that maybe he wasn't really capable of being husband,
I see.
like fulfilling those basic obligations.
Okay, so we've got the red flags.
Right.
We've got the questionable behavior.
Uh-huh.
What happens next?
So then they have their son, Matthew,
Okay.
and sadly, Matthew is diagnosed with autism.
Oh, wow.
And this is where things take a really, really heartbreaking turn.
Okay.
Because Neil, he has like this incredibly negative reaction to Matthew's diagnosis.
Really?
I mean, it's really sad.
So he just wasn't able to handle it.
He couldn't handle it. There was even, and this is hard to even talk about, but
Okay.
there was an incident where he, like, violently shook baby Matthew to try to make him stop crying.
Oh, my God.
It's like, chilling to think about.
It's awful.
And it's just like, it's just this clear example that he was just not equipped to be a parent,
Right.
especially to a child with special needs.
Yeah, it's a lot to take on.
And the neglect didn't stop there.
Oh, no.
He just, like, completely emotionally withdrew from Matthew.
Really?
Like, he was so ashamed.
Ashamed of his son's condition.
Wow, that's tough.
It was just really hard for Zeth, because she had to step up and be like both mom and dad.
Yeah, I can imagine.
She was incredibly strong through all of this.
So we've got this pattern of behavior. Uh-huh.
These concerning incidents.
Yeah.
But like, as if things couldn't get worse.
What else could happen?
Zeth discovers Neil's infidelity.
Oh, no.
And I don't mean like one affair.
Multiple.
Multiple affairs,
Oh, no.
including one with a student.
A student?
Yeah, at the school where they both worked.
My gosh.
I mean, that's just like a complete disregard for their marriage.
Yeah, it is. Right. And for, like, the trust that you're supposed to have in a relationship.
Absolutely.
So, Zeth, I mean, understandably, she is at her breaking point.
Makes sense.
You know, years of this emotional strain, financial strain,
Right.
the infidelity,
Wow.
neglect of their son.
It's a lot.
It all took its toll.
Yeah, it all adds up.
And so she takes a bold step
Okay.
and files for annulment.
Annulment. Oh, no.
And she bases her case on this legal concept called psychological incapacity.
Psychological incapacity.
And this is where it gets really interesting from a legal perspective.
Okay, I'm listening.
Because annulment in the Philippines,
Yeah.
it's typically granted in very specific cases.
Right, like fraud or coercion.
Exactly, like if there was fraud or coercion, or, you know, if one person was underage at the time of the marriage.
Right, right.
But this psychological incapacity thing,
Yeah.
it's part of the family code, but it's relatively new.
New, okay.
And it was like really untested ground for annulment.
So it was kind of a long shot.
It was a gamble, yeah.
Interesting.
And to make things even more complicated,
More complicated. How?
Neil refused to participate in any of the legal proceedings
Really?
or undergo any kind of psychological evaluation.
So he just didn't cooperate at all.
Nope, not at all.
That's interesting.
And, you know, sometimes people do that in these cases.
Right.
If they just ignore it, it'll go away.
Like if they don't cooperate.
Exactly.
It'll just fall apart.
Yeah, but for Neil, it backfired big time.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So the lower courts,
Uh-huh.
they initially granted the annulment.
They did.
They did.
Wow.
But then it got reversed on appeal.
Reversed. Oh, man.
So it seemed like Zeth's case was just falling apart.
I see.
But then it went all the way to the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court.
And that's when everything changed.
Everything changed. Okay, tell me more.
The Supreme Court decided to use this case.
This case specifically.
This very case.
Wow.
To, like, redefine what psychological incapacity actually means.
Redefine it. Okay.
When it comes to marriage in the Philippines.
This is huge then.
Huge. I mean, this was a landmark decision.
Wow. A landmark decision.
And they basically said, look,
Right.
psychological incapacity, it's not just about, you know, having a mental illness.
Right.
It can also be about these, like, deeply ingrained personality flaws.
Personality flaw.
That make someone just, like, incapable of fulfilling the essential obligations of marriage.
I see.
It was a game changer.
So what they're saying is you don't have to have, like, a diagnosable mental illness.
Exactly.
It can be something else.
It can be these deeper issues that are preventing someone from being a good spouse.
That makes sense.
And, you know, they pointed to Neil's behavior throughout the whole marriage as evidence of this.
Right.
You know, his financial dependence, his infidelity, and, like, most importantly, his neglect of his son.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And the court, they didn't hold back. They used some strong language to describe his behavior.
Like what?
They called him insensitive, irritable, and aggressive.
Wow.
They said he had a deficit in social charitableness, compassion, and remorse.
That's pretty harsh.
Yeah, and that coming from the highest court in the land.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
It is.
It shows you how seriously they took his actions.
Right.
And I think it was like a message to everyone, right?
Everyone.
That marriage, it's not just a piece of paper.
Yep.
It's a real commitment.
Yep.
And it requires you to be, like, emotionally mature and responsible.
Okay, I see.
So in the end, after 17 years,
17 years.
17 years of trying to make it work,
Wow.
Zeth was finally granted her freedom.
Good for her.
The Supreme Court said their marriage was void from the beginning,
Void.
as if it never even happened,
Wow.
like hitting the reset button.
Totally.
And this wasn't just about, like, a messy divorce, right?
Right.
This was a precedent-setting decision.
Yeah, a landmark case.
And it had these huge consequences for Filipino families and how we view the whole institution of marriage.
That's incredible.
So now the question is, what does this mean for other couples in the Philippines?
Yeah. What does it mean?
Who are facing similar challenges, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's where things get really, really interesting.
I can't wait to find out.
And we're going to dive into all that right after this.
Yeah, it's good.
So this case really got people talking, didn't it?
It did, yeah. It really brought this whole idea of psychological incapacity into the spotlight.
And for our listeners who, you know, might not be super familiar with Philippine law,
Okay.
can you explain, like, what annulment actually means?
Sure.
And how it's different from, you know, divorce, which we hear about more often.
Okay, so unlike a lot of other countries, the Philippines doesn't actually have divorce in the traditional sense.
Right.
So annulment is basically this legal process
Okay.
where you declare a marriage null and void as if it never even happened.
So it's like hitting the rewind button on the whole marriage.
Yeah, exactly.
But I imagine it's not like super easy to get an annulment.
It's not.
So what are the typical reasons, the grounds, for getting an annulment in the Philippines?
Okay, so traditionally, annulment has been granted in cases of fraud, coercion, or if one of the parties was underage at the time of the marriage.
I see.
But psychological incapacity, that was actually added to the family code as a ground for annulment back in 1988.
Okay, but it sounds like this case really clarified what psychological incapacity really means in practice.
Right.
Because it's not just about, having a mental illness, right?
Exactly. Before this case, there was actually a lot of debate and confusion about how to interpret that term, psychological incapacity.
Okay.
Some people argued that it had to be a clinically diagnosable mental disorder,
right.
Something very specific.
Right.
But the Supreme Court in this case, they said, no, it's broader than that.
So what do they say it means then?
They ruled that psychological incapacity, it refers to a personality structure.
Okay.
That's so deeply ingrained, so fundamental, that it makes a person incapable of fulfilling the essential obligations of marriage.
Okay.
And it's not about a temporary condition or something that can be easily fixed with therapy or,
It's deeper than that.
It's much deeper.
So in Neil's case, it wasn't just that he made some bad choices, right?
Right.
It's that those choices, they were coming from this deeper place.
Exactly.
Of just not being able to be a responsible partner.
Yeah, and the courts, they really looked at his behavior over the entire course of the marriage. The financial dependence, the infidelity, the neglect of his son.
Right.
And they concluded that these weren't just isolated incidents.
Yeah, like a pattern.
Exactly. They were symptoms of this much deeper, more fundamental incapacity.
This kind of makes me think about all those relationship advice columns you read, people tell you to watch out for red flags.
Right, the red flag.
So do you think that Neil's behavior, before and during the marriage, those were giant waving red flags?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The inability to commit to one woman, the financial instability, the fact that he was so easily swayed by, pressure from other people.
Right.
All of those things were huge warning signs.
That maybe he just wasn't cut out for marriage.
Yeah, that he wasn't ready or capable.
It's kind of like a cautionary tale, right?
It is.
Reminding us that love, it's not always enough to make a marriage work.
Right. Sometimes it's just not enough.
Sometimes the incompatibility runs so deep, you just can't overcome it.
No matter how hard you try.
Even with the best of intentions.
And that's where I think this case gets really fascinating from a societal perspective.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it challenges those traditional notions of marriage as something that you just have to endure no matter what.
Stick it out.
Stick it out no matter how unhappy you are.
Yeah. It's almost like the court is saying,
Right.
look, we get it. Not all marriages can be saved.
Yeah.
And sometimes the most compassionate thing to do is let people move on.
Right.
And find happiness elsewhere.
And I think that's a really important message.
Yeah.
Because it recognizes that people have the right to pursue happiness in their personal lives, even if it means ending a marriage that's clearly not working.
This seems like a really big shift in how the Philippines views marriage, right?
I think it's a reflection of this growing recognition of individual autonomy and the fact that, relationships, they're not static.
They evolve.
They evolve, they change. And marriage, it's not seen as this unbreakable bond anymore.
Right.
It's more of a partnership
Okay.
that requires mutual effort, respect,
Right.
and a fundamental capacity for commitment.
And speaking of effort, Neil didn't seem to put in much effort at all, especially when it came to Matthew.
Right.
So do you think that, his neglect of Matthew was a big factor in the court's decision?
I think it was a huge factor. The Supreme Court really focused on Neil's shocking disregard for his son's well-being as a really clear example of his psychological incapacity.
And they used some pretty harsh words, too.
They did. They talked about his lack of social charitableness, compassion, and remorse.
Which paints a very specific picture of his character.
Yeah, it does. And it emphasizes the importance of responsible parenting.
Well,
Like the court was saying, look, neglecting your parental duties, that's a serious matter.
especially when a child has special needs.
Especially then.
This also brings up something I've been thinking about.
Okay.
the role of expert testimony in these kinds of cases.
Right.
Because Neil, he refused to participate in any kind of psychological evaluation.
He did.
So how did the court handle that?
Okay, so expert opinion, it's not always strictly required in psychological incapacity cases.
Okay.
But it can be very valuable.
I bet.
Especially for establishing the severity and incurability of the condition. So in this case, the court relied heavily on the testimony of this expert, Dr. Tayag, a really renowned psychologist.
But Dr. Tayag, she only evaluated Zeth, right?
She did.
Not Neil.
Right.
So how could her opinion be valid then if she never even met with him?
So that's a great question, and the court actually addressed that specifically.
Okay.
They emphasize that expert testimony, it has to meet certain standards to be admissible.
Of course.
So Dr. Tayag's opinion was deemed valid because it wasn't just based on Zeth's account.
Okay.
She also reviewed a ton of documentation, like a lot of paperwork.
Right.
And she interviewed witnesses who knew Neil and had observed his behavior firsthand.
So even though Neil tried to, stonewall the process, the court was still able to, make a decision based on what evidence was available.
Exactly.
And that highlights how important it is to, document everything.
Right. Keep records, gather witness testimony.
Yeah, it all matters.
It really does.
Now, this case, obviously, it generated a ton of buzz.
Yeah.
What are some of the criticisms you've heard about the ruling?
One of the most common ones is that it makes annulment too easy.
Okay.
And that it could potentially weaken the institution of marriage in the Philippines.
Makes sense.
People worry that it'll give people an easy out,
Mm-hmm.
just because they're unhappy or they've fallen out of love.
That's a valid concern. What would you say to people who think that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the burden of proof in these cases is still very high.
Okay.
It's not enough to just say, my spouse is difficult or, we've grown apart.
It has to be more than that.
It has to be much more than that.
You need evidence.
You have to present clear and convincing evidence that your spouse is truly psychologically incapable.
Incapable of fulfilling those marriage obligations.
Right. And that usually means you need a lot of documentation.
Okay.
Witness testimony. And potentially even psychological evaluations yourself.
So it's a long process.
It is. It's a lengthy process. It's challenging. And the courts, they don't take it lightly.
So this case isn't like a free pass for everyone to just walk away from their marriage.
No, absolutely not. Marriage is hard work.
Yeah, it is.
And every couple is going to face challenges.
Right.
But this ruling, it's not a quick fix for every marital problem.
It's for very specific situations.
Exactly. It's for those situations where the incompatibility is so profound.
Right.
And the personality flaws are so deeply rooted.
You just can't fix it.
That the marriage is really beyond repair.
This case brings up some really big questions for all of us.
It does.
Whether we're married or not.
It makes you think.
It does. It makes you think about relationships, about responsibility.
Yeah.
What it really means to commit to another person.
For life.
Yeah, for life.
And that's what makes it so fascinating, I think.
It really is.
Because it's not just a legal drama. It's a reflection of, our changing understanding of what it means to be in a relationship.
Of love, commitment, all of that.
Exactly.
So we've talked about, the legal stuff and how this case, changed things in the Philippines. But I think there's, another layer here.
Yeah.
That's worth talking about.
I agree.
What can we all learn from this?
Yeah. What are the takeaways?
Not just the legal stuff, but, for our own lives.
Right, for our relationship.
Exactly. Because this whole situation, it really makes you think about choosing your partner, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Are you with the right person?
Big questions.
Big questions.
And it's not just about finding someone you're attracted to or whatever.
It's got to be more than that.
It's about really digging deeper.
Okay.
Looking at their character, their values.
Right, who are they really?
Exactly. Can they really commit?
Can they handle responsibility?
Are they going to be there for you?
All of that.
Yeah, all the important stuff.
Then it's about recognizing those red flags, right?
Oh, yeah, the red flags.
Don't
ignore them.
Don't ignore them, yeah.
Because hoping things will magically change after the wedding.
Right. That's not a strategy.
It's not. It rarely works out that way.
In this case, it's like a perfect example of that.
Yeah, you can't just fix deeply ingrained personality flaws.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
That's tough.
It is tough, but it's better to face that stuff before you
Yeah, before you make that commitment.
Make that lifelong commitment, exactly.
And I think it's not just about choosing the right partner.
Okay.
It's also about understanding our own responsibilities in a relationship.
What do you mean by that?
Well, marriage, it's a partnership, right?
It is, yeah.
It requires both people to contribute.
Okay.
Equally, financially, emotionally, all of it.
And in this case, Neil's financial dependence on Zeth was like a big problem, right?
Yeah, it was a point of contention for sure.
So how do you think that reflects on like gender roles in the Philippines?
That's a good question.
Because it's changing, right?
Yeah, it's definitely evolved.
What's expected of husbands and wives?
Traditionally, the husband was the breadwinner.
Right, the provider.
But now you have more and more women in the workforce.
Yeah, making their own money. Exactly, and that's changing everything.
And it seems like the court, they recognized that shift
I think they did.
in their ruling.
Uh-huh.
They said shared responsibility is key.
Yeah, they made it clear that Neil's financial dependence was a problem.
It showed he wasn't pulling his weight.
Exactly.
And marriage is a two-way street.
It's a partnership. Both people got to contribute.
It's interesting, too, that the Supreme Court decision, it wasn't unanimous.
Right, there were dissenting opinions.
So even within the legal community, there's still debate about this whole psychological incapacity thing.
Yeah, there's no easy answer. What might be psychological incapacity in one case might not be in another case.
It's complicated.
Very nuanced, very case-specific.
But it shows how the law is trying to, keep up with society. Right?
Yeah, the law, it's not set in stone.
It has to adapt.
It's always evolving.
To reflect how people are living.
To reflect our relationships, our challenges.
And that's what's so interesting about this case.
It's not just a story about a marriage falling apart.
Yeah, it's bigger than that.
It's about how we understand love, commitment, building a life together.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Zeth versus Neil Fopalan,
Okay.
what's the one thing you hope listeners take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to choose your partner wisely.
Yeah.
Pay attention to those red flags.
Don't ignore them.
Don't ignore them, and remember that you deserve to be in a relationship where you feel loved, respected, supported.
Those are the things that matter.
And this case reminds us that marriage is not a fairy tale.
Right. It's not a movie.
It's real life. It takes work. It takes understanding.
It takes two people willing to grow.
Together and individually.
And if you're facing challenges in your own relationship, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Absolutely. Talk to someone you trust.
A therapist, a counselor, a friend, whoever.
Sometimes just talking about it can make all the difference.
And if this case has, resonated with you, we want to hear from you.
Share your thoughts, your experiences.
You can find us on social media. Use the hashtag #TheDeepDive.
Let's keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe.
Hit that button so you don't miss our next deep dive.
We'll be exploring another fascinating topic.
Guaranteed to make you think.
Until then, keep diving deep.